Hey everybody, welcome to my booth. I'm Jay, and in a recent subscriber feedback video, I talked a lot about breath and how it is informed by and or informs the way our performances go, whether we're communicating well, properly, or if there's something else going on that perhaps we could put on the shelf for a spell. And so I thought it would be helpful, because a lot of you had follow-up questions about it, to just talk a bit more about breath and how you can think about it to maybe improve your performances further. Before we dive in though, hey, if you like this stuff and you find it helpful, you can help me by clicking the buttons down there, and there are other ways to support this whole thing in the description below. Breath is one of those things that for myself was huge and foundational in unlocking it was like the floodgates opened and I all of a sudden went from walking to running, if not flying. And that's not an understatement. It was really, really big in my development as a performer. And so there are a few things that I want to talk about specifically that helped me in that transition. One, a lot of stuff is thrown around about the diaphragm. Breathe from the diaphragm, support with the diaphragm, project from your diaphragm, whatever it may be. And that's how a lot of my training, particularly when I was singing around high school, was founded. A lot was centered on the diaphragm. And I get the rationale behind it. It's a focus point that can drive a lot of the other mechanisms of breath behind it. But the main issue with all of that verbiage or language behind the diaphragm, project with, support from, etc., it denotes or can be conflated with a use of force, meaning that you're putting effort into the diaphragm doing its thing in order to project properly or well. And that's simply just not the case in terms of the way the diaphragm works naturally. If I'm just sitting here breathing, my diaphragm is going to do its thing without me thinking about it and without any effort. If I breathe in, the diaphragm simply relaxes and air comes into my body. And then as I speak, it contracts and allows air to flow out of my lungs and passing my vocal cords, which allows me to speak. And so the reason why that fundamental difference is important is there's no force required here. It is important to support from the diaphragm in certain instances, but that should be driven more so from intent, because if I focus on that, then it becomes a system of tension and effort, when really it should be flow as the primary direction. So the difference would be if I'm using from or projecting the diaphragm with force, it would look like this. And then I have to go like this to really talk, and it's all of a sudden becomes kind of tense, and it can be a little bit more restricted and stuff. Whereas if it's not, I just let the air flow in and it goes pretty smoothly until I'm done speaking, and then I need to take in some breath to further communicate. So that's a kind of reductive difference about the two of them, but it's important to focus more so on flow than any sort of muscular effort, because the diaphragm's going to do its job regardless. So here's an exercise to help sort of tune you in that direction, or help you to check in and, tune you in that direction. So I like to model my breath like it's an accordion in front of me at times. I do this with a lot of folks when I'm coaching. Is if I just sit here and breathe for a few breaths and just observe. I'm not trying to breathe at a specific tempo. I'm not trying to breathe longer or get all meditation about it. I'm just watching what's happening and checking in with not only my diaphragm, but my ribs and everything that's going on there, if there's any tension in my shoulders, and I'm just watching the flow of breath and modeling it or mimicking that flow with my hands as if it were an accordion or a bellows. So to demonstrate, and you'll notice that it just flows. There's nothing I'm thinking about. I'm just breathing, checking in with my ribs, watching in my mind's eye as they expand, feeling my stomach moving and the flow easy in and out. My shoulders aren't raising or lowering. And there's no point of halting or tension. It is an even flow from inhale to exhale. And there's no point where I stop and switch. So the next step, once you've followed along with that for a little bit, is to add in a sigh. So feel free to follow along for this one, but we'll start with just breathing, and then I'll demonstrate what a sigh looks like. And it may sound a little weird, look a little funny, but the thing that I'm tuning here is as I breathe in, or as I like to think about it, letting the breath simply fall into my body. Again, the diaphragm isn't pulling air in, it's simply relaxing and letting air fall into my body. So as I let air fall in, I breathe into capacity, to my full lung capacity or close to it, and then I breathe out, and the flow maintains this smooth accordion pulsing here, and there's no point at which I introduce tension to push air out and project a sigh. It just maintains. So let's try it again. And this time, notice if there are any points where you feel your hands mimicking or in your body there's a tension as the air is coming out. If you feel like you need to make a sound, let that go. It's fine if your sigh is just a breathy little whisper. Totally fine. In fact, that's probably better. And then, of course, if you feel that there's any tension pulling air into your body, realign it. Think of it as just letting air fall in, and leave it at that. So we'll start with the breaths again, and then move into a sigh once more. And once I start sighing, feel free to join in. Cool. Next, the next level here is to add a little bit more of speech in there, because a sigh doesn't really have any information in it. But now we'll count, which is a step closer to traditional communication. So we'll again go through the same steps, and then I'll start counting. Now, an important thing to note here, I usually count from 1 to 5, but if in your counting you run out of air, don't try to keep up with me. Be honest about when you run out of air. If you run out of air at 2, let it go. If you run out of air at 1, let it go. If you find yourself counting to 7 or 8, then you may be restraining your flow of air a bit, and just be a little bit more free. Maybe restart the series, go back to breathing, then sighing, then counting. So I'll go through all the steps again, and feel free to either watch and then go back and follow along, or jump in whenever you want. Let's do it. One, two, three, four. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Awesome. So a few things to just reiterate here. The whole point of this is to maintain the flow of your breath. And that flow, it mimics what we do in natural communication. Right now, I'm flowing because my primary concern is to communicate with you. And so I naturally breathe in because I've programmed this over time, over my whole life, to breathe in, allow the air to fall in that I need to communicate whatever thought I am about to communicate. And so this exercise, as we flow through those each, helps to try to align those different steps in a way that we're not introducing tension, because the big difference between natural communication in our day-to-day life and voiceover or audiobooks is in voiceover or audiobooks, we have to say specific words and say those specific words as if they were our own. And in those cases, it becomes weird and sometimes halting and tension because new elements are introduced. And so we're trying to recreate or reprogram or reinforce, however you want to think about it, our natural breathing pattern so that we can use that when we're reading a script or something that has to be somewhat curated. A couple other small things in that whole breathing exercise. Make sure that your mouth is open and relaxed, breathing in through your mouth and out through your mouth. The reason why is generally in human speech and communication, if I'm open and receiving information from someone else, I'll have my mouth somewhat open as I'm breathing in and out, and I'm open to information. I'm saying open a lot, maybe subliminal, because when your mouth is open, there's a sense of vulnerability and permeability. As an example, if I'm really listening to someone, okay, but if I'm skeptical or somewhat closed off, it may look more like this. And a key difference there is my mouth in open, permeable is open. I'm receiving information, breathing in, and I'm ready to respond whenever I need. Whereas mouth closed, I'm a little reserved and a little caged off. That's not a rule categorically, but it's one of those rules that stands more often than not. So that series of exercises are quite literally the first step on a longer journey of getting more in touch with your own breath flow, the way your body breathes naturally, and how you can then tie that to how you would perform a voiceover, audiobook, whatever it may be, and honestly in your day-to-day life. And for me, all of this was incredibly foundational in my own communication. As I said, I think it was a difference between walking and flying for me in terms of my breathing. If you'd like me to make more of these types of videos, let me know. I'm happy to. There's that. And if you'd like to go a step further, I have a couple recommendations for you. Firstly, a lot of my training in voice at NYU in their MFA acting program, it shares a significant amount of its DNA with the book Freeing the Natural Voice. It's by Kristen Linklater, and it's a really, really great resource if you'd like to have some voice training on your own time. And it's worth investing the time in. It's a book that gives you like hour-long exercises, which can be at face value a little tedious to go through, but in all honesty, they are very, very much worth it because, as I said, this whole experience and getting in touch with my own breath and the way it flows naturally was foundational to unlocking a whole new level of self for me. That's not hyperbole. My performances in acting totally shifted in a really, really positive way. So if you're looking for a cheap sort of introduction to this sort of thing, Freeing the Natural Voice is a great resource. Additionally, if you have the resources to pursue a voice coach, they're absolutely fantastic. I've worked with several. If you know anyone who works with or can look anybody up, the Scott Miller method is the method that we used at NYU, and teachers in that system are wonderful, wonderful people in general, and it, again, is a fantastic thing. There's also coaching on my website, and if you'd like to work on voice stuff, I am not a certified voice teacher through any discipline, but I do have, 3 years of voice training at minimum under my belt with some pretty expert people. So there's that if you're interested. Anyway, until the next one of these, be well, everybody, and I'll see you there. Toodles.